Gemini, without realizing it, you will teach a man a lesson. There are moments in life when you don't even realize you're holding a mirror. You're just being yourself, curious, expressive, in motion, and yet someone standing before you suddenly pauses. Something you said, or the way you held your truth with grace, awakens something in them. It wasn't planned, it wasn't forced, but it shifted them. That's exactly what's on the horizon now. There is a man, perhaps someone you know well, or someone you're about to meet, who has lived in certainty. A man who thought he had it all figured out. But in your presence, something will soften, something will shake. You won't confront him. You won't try to change him. And yet, the way you carry your truth with quiet clarity will show him a way of being he never considered before. This isn't just a lesson for him. It's a revelation for you. Because you're about to discover the extraordinary impact your authenticity has, not just on hearts, but on consciousness. So, if you feel something stirring inside you as you hear this, don't ignore it. That feeling is the soul remembering its own light. If this message resonates, take a moment to like this video. It helps others on their journey find it too. Subscribe to Esoteric Wisdom to stay close to the truths that were written in the stars for you. And if someone in your life needs a gentle mirror, share this with them. Your truth may become their turning point. Are you ready to begin? Gate 1. The power of being misunderstood. Gemini, your brilliance has always been obvious. Quick-minded, perceptive, a natural communicator. People often look to you for words when they can't find their own. And yet, beneath this gift lies a truth that few recognize. Being heard does not always mean being understood. You've been misunderstood more times than you can count. Sometimes they call you too much, too scattered, too talkative, too curious. Other times, too little, not deep enough, not grounded enough, not committed enough. And in between those labels, you've tried to hold yourself together in a world that never quite sees you clearly. But what if being misunderstood wasn't a weakness? What if it was the very space where your soul's power was waiting to emerge? Let me tell you a story. There was once a Gemini woman named Mira. She worked in a fast-paced creative firm, always on the move, always thinking 2 steps ahead. Her ideas were revolutionary, but the men in charge rarely listened. One in particular, a senior executive, would smile politely and then repeat her ideas in his own voice later, taking credit. She didn't confront him. She didn't need to. Instead, Mira began anchoring herself in a deeper truth. She knew who she was, even if they didn't. One day, during a high-stakes meeting, the team faced a sudden crisis. Confusion, panic, blame. The senior executive froze. Mira stood up calmly and outlined a solution, strategic, bold, and entirely hers. The room fell silent. No one interrupted. No one dismissed her this time. That moment changed everything, not because she raised her voice, but because she stood in her truth without needing anyone's permission to speak it. Gemini, that's your power. You don't need to argue to be right. You don't need to shout to be heard. Your clarity, when rooted in self-trust, becomes undeniable. And here's the deeper layer. You'll soon be placed in a situation where a man who once underestimated you will be forced to see the strength he couldn't recognize before. It might not come through confrontation. In fact, it may look like silence, like walking away, like choosing yourself with so much peace that it makes noise in his soul. This is the kind of awakening you don't plan. It happens because your frequency has shifted. You're no longer seeking approval, you're living from alignment. And alignment, Gemini, is magnetic. He may have believed that dominance is strength, that control equals power, that intellect is sharper than intuition. But when he witnesses the way you navigate life, with adaptability, yes, but also with integrity, something inside him will begin to unravel. It won't be comfortable for him, but for you, it will feel like coming home. You see, Gemini, you've been in training for this moment your entire life. Every time you swallowed your opinion to keep the peace, every time you made yourself small to be liked, every time your truth was interrupted, overlooked, or laughed off, you were gathering something sacred. Wisdom, discernment, the quiet fire of knowing. Now, it's your time to speak, not with noise, but with presence. Let me ask you something. Have you ever had a conversation where someone looked confused but later came back, changed? That's the Gemini effect. You plant seeds that take root long after you've moved on. You don't need to force anything. Your gift is subtle transformation. And this man, whoever he is in your story, will not forget you. Not because you tried to teach him, but because you were the lesson. You showed him that leadership doesn't come from domination, but from emotional intelligence. That confidence isn't loud, but unwavering. That wisdom doesn't boast, it illuminates. And as for you, you'll finally understand that your voice was never too much. It was too true for those who hadn't yet awakened.
So speak gently.
Walk firmly. And when the moment comes, let your truth ripple out without apology. The man who underestimated you will find himself learning, not from your words, but from your being. And you'll finally stop doubting that being yourself is the greatest influence of all. Gate 2, when you choose silence instead of validation. There comes a moment in every Gemini's journey when you realize that not every truth needs to be explained. Not every wound needs to be defended. Not every misunderstanding needs to be corrected. Gemini, you who have danced in conversations like wind through leaves, who've been the one to ask the questions, hold the dialogue, stir the ideas. There is something sacred waiting in your silence. Not the silence of fear, but the silence of knowing. This is the silence that confuses those who used to control you with noise. There will be a moment, soon, when someone, perhaps a man who once thought himself stronger, louder, smarter, will press you for a reaction. He might challenge your truth, dismiss your values, twist your words. And in that moment, every past version of you will want to respond, to defend, to prove. But something deeper will whisper, don't. And you'll listen. Because this time, Gemini, you won't be looking for validation. You'll be embodying it. Let me tell you about a woman named Celine, a Gemini healer, soft-spoken but sharp. She'd spent most of her life in conversations with men who didn't know how to listen, bosses, lovers, mentors, men who spoke over her, not with her. One day, she stood in front of a man who had loved her with conditions. He asked, "Why are you pulling away?
Say something.
Explain yourself." She looked at him, calm as water before sunrise, and simply said, "Because I don't need to anymore." She walked away, not out of anger, but out of wholeness. That moment wasn't loud, but it echoed in his life for years. Gemini, you're not here to argue your worth. You're here to remember it. And when you do, your silence becomes thunder in the lives of those who once mistook your flexibility for fragility. The man in your story, he might not be malicious. He might be brilliant, even well-meaning. But he is still asleep in a way you're not. He's lived in a world where power sounds like authority, where strength wears armor, where intelligence argues and confidence interrupts. But when he meets you in your new frequency, the Gemini who no longer needs to fill the room, he'll feel something shift. Not in you, in him, because the power dynamic will dissolve. Not because you outwit him, but because you outgrew the game. When you choose to be silent in the face of someone who expects you to perform, to explain, to win, something incredible happens. You break a contract you never agreed to in the first place. And suddenly, you're not just teaching a lesson. You're embodying a new way of relating. You are showing the world and him that peace is not passivity. That walking away is not weakness. That silence is not surrender. It is sacred. It is self-love. And it is a mirror. He may not see it at first. He may blame you, call you cold,
say you changed.
But eventually, the stillness you left behind will grow in his mind like a garden he never knew how to tend. And one day, he'll sit with himself and realize, it wasn't what you said that transformed him. It was what you didn't say. It was the absence of drama. The refusal to fight for a seat at a table you no longer needed. It was the way you honored yourself, without making anyone wrong. Gemini, this is the gift of your maturity. The moment you stop explaining your intuition, it sharpens. The moment you stop narrating your value, it shines. The moment you stop seeking to be heard is the moment they begin to listen. So if you find yourself standing in front of someone who cannot see you clearly, don't dim yourself to fit their lens. Just be still. Let them misinterpret if they must, because the truth is not lost. It is alive in your energy.
And it will find its way.
You are no longer who you were. And that is your quiet revolution. Gate 3. The sacred mirror of soulful love. Gemini, you are ruled by Mercury, messenger of the gods, keeper of minds, traveler between realms. But what happens when the journey is no longer external? When the message you must carry is not for the world, but for yourself? There is a love approaching, or perhaps it is already in your orbit, that will not look the way love used to. It will not be a chase or a conquest. It will not come cloaked in intensity or chaos. It will arrive like a stillness inside a storm. This love is not here to complete you. It is here to reveal you. And the mirror will be a man. But not just any man. He may not even look like the kind you've been drawn to before. He may be quieter, gentler, perhaps even uncomfortable in the presence of your brilliance at first. But it is in his discomfort that something beautiful begins. Because this love, Gemini, will not ask you to perform. It will not reward your cleverness. It will seek your presence. This man will not be enchanted by the masks you've worn. He'll be captivated by the face behind them. The one you only show when no one is watching. The one that sighs after the lights go down. The one that still carries the ache of being misunderstood, even in a room full of admirers. He won't ask for your story. He'll ask for your silence. Not to keep you quiet, but to hear what lives in your stillness. You might resist it at first. The impulse to dazzle, to joke, to analyze will rise like muscle memory. But slowly, gently, his gaze will remind you that you no longer have to earn affection. You only have to receive it. And that's where the fear may come. Because Gemini, deep down, you have often believed that being loved means being useful. That to be adored, you must perform. That silence is dangerous. That stillness means rejection. But in this new sacred mirror, you will see something else. You will see that the more you soften, the more deeply he sees you. That the more you allow, the more fully he arrives. He may be flawed, human, sometimes uncertain, but he will not flinch when your vulnerability shows. He will not try to fix your silence, nor decorate your pauses with noise. He will meet them. And in meeting them, he will show you what your soul has craved all along. To be known without translation.
This is not just about romance.
This is about healing the Gemini wound of emotional exile. You, the communicator, the thinker, the wanderer of words, have often found yourself stranded when the language of emotion required more than logic could offer. You have tried to explain your way into intimacy, but this time, you won't have to. Because he will speak the quiet dialect of presence. And in his presence, your inner voices will settle. Let me tell you about a Gemini man named Elias. Brilliant, witty, restless. He could light up a room with his ideas, charm a stranger in minutes. But in love, he always ran. As soon as it got quiet, he got scared. Until one day, he met a woman who didn't chase him, who didn't laugh louder when he made jokes, who didn't fill the silences. She just stayed. And one day, Elias broke down in front of her and said, "I don't know what to say to keep you here." She took his hand and whispered, "You don't have to say anything." It was the first time he realized that real love wasn't something he had to perform for, it was something he could rest in. Gemini, that is your lesson now. Love that allows rest. Love that calls back the pieces of yourself you scattered in conversations, in compromises, in the desperate search for connection. The sacred mirror is not there to flatter you. It is there to reflect you, to show you your fullness, your depth, your ache, your grace. And yes, this love may come with challenges. You may be tempted to sabotage it, to test it, to shrink or shine too bright, to run. But if you stay, if you choose to stay fully present, you will discover something you've never known. That love, when it is aligned, is not a prison. It is a portal. It is not a demand. It is a dance. And in that dance, you will no longer be two performers acting out old stories. You will be two souls in rhythm, mirroring, learning, forgiving, becoming. This is the sacred mirror of soulful love. and you are ready to see yourself in it. Gate 4, Gemini's Silent Rebellion, the awakening of personal authority. Gemini, your life has been shaped by the stories you've told, and the stories others have told about you. Quick-witted, playful, the social butterfly, the eternal student. But what happens when the stories no longer fit? When the roles you've played feel more like cages than choices? This is not just a chapter of transformation. This is a rebellion, a quiet, internal rebellion, where the version of you who smiled through discomfort, who negotiated truth to keep peace, who bent yourself into all the right shapes so others could stay comfortable, finally says, no more. This gate is not loud, but it is radical. Because here, Gemini, you begin to take your power back from the places you once gave it away. Maybe it started subtly. A conversation where you didn't laugh at the joke that wasn't funny. A decision you made without over-explaining. A moment when you said, I don't agree, and didn't rush to soften the edge. These small moments are not small at all. They are tremors before the quake. You are awakening to the truth that your voice is not just a tool for harmony. It is a compass. And more than that, it is a boundary. You are not here to play the part others assigned you. You are here to rewrite the script. In the past, your gift of perspective made you a peacemaker. But now, it becomes something more, a sword of clarity. You are learning to discern between compromise and self-abandonment, between flexibility and forgetting who you are. And this discernment is uncomfortable because it asks you to leave behind the roles that once kept you safe. But they no longer serve the soul you are becoming. Let me tell you about a Gemini woman named Salma. All her life, she played nice. She nodded in boardrooms when her ideas were dismissed. She smiled at family dinners even when her boundaries were crossed. But one day, her body began to betray her. Chronic fatigue, migraines, tension she couldn't explain. She went to a healer, who told her something she never forgot. Your illness is the grief of your unspoken truths. Salma began to weep. Not because she didn't know it was true, but because she had known for years and never felt allowed to admit it. That day, she began speaking, not louder, but truer. Not to prove, but to protect. Her life began to shift.
Slowly.
Sometimes painfully. But with every honest word, she reclaimed a piece of herself. Gemini, this is the quiet power of your rebellion. You do not need to burn the world down to be free. You simply need to stop lighting yourself on fire to keep others warm. There is a man in your life, or soon will be, who may test this growth. He is used to the old version of you, the agreeable one, the one who danced around discomfort to keep the air light. But now, when you speak from your inner alignment, when you say no without guilt, when you stand without performing, you will surprise him, not with aggression, but with authority. This is the turning point. He may not understand. He may even push back. But whether he evolves or exits is not the measure of your success. The measure is this, that you chose you, that you chose self-respect over approval, that you chose clarity over comfort, that you chose wholeness over performance. This is not selfishness, Gemini. It is sovereignty. And it is time. Time to stop asking for permission to be full. Time to stop translating your truth into something palatable. Time to stop being digestible for those who've never learned to chew complexity. You're not here to fit. You're here to stand. And when you stand in the truth of who you are, gentle, layered, bright, thoughtful, contradictory, you become a beacon. Not everyone will understand, but the right people will find you by the light of your liberation. In this gate, you are not becoming someone new. You are remembering who you were before the world taught you to edit yourself.
So speak, Gemini.
Speak the words that shake the room in silence. Walk away from what drains you, even if it calls you selfish. Hold your boundaries like sacred altars, not fences. And know this, your truth is not a burden. It is a blessing. Your authenticity is not too much. It is medicine. Your rebellion is not destruction. It is creation. And your power? It was never in how many roles you could play. It was in your refusal to keep playing them. Conclusion: the return to wholeness. Gemini, you've walked through the gates not just of knowledge, but of remembrance. You've looked into the mirror of your own adaptability and questioned, where am I in all of this? You've untangled yourself from stories written for the comfort of others, and now you stand, imperfect, radiant, real. This was never about becoming someone new. It was about remembering the sacred power that has always lived within you. You see now that your gift isn't simply in knowing many things. It's in your capacity to feel deeply while thinking clearly, to dance between worlds without losing your center. And perhaps most beautifully, you've realized that your softness is not your weakness. Your laughter, not a distraction. Your words, not just clever, they're spells when spoken from truth. There is a man who may walk away from this changed. There may be friends, family, or strangers whose eyes soften because they saw you refuse to abandon yourself. But none of that defines your value. What matters most is that you now see what you are truly capable of when you stand in your full essence. From this place, Gemini, you don't have to chase approval. You attract respect by being aligned. You don't need to explain your worth. You embody it. You don't need to dim your voice. You use it to illuminate what others cannot yet name. So, I ask you this. Will you continue this journey of wholeness, even when it's not easy? Will you speak the truth, even when your voice shakes? Will you allow the old identities to fall away so the real you can rise? Because the world doesn't need a Gemini who performs. It needs a Gemini who remembers that joy can be wise, that playfulness can carry purpose, that duality is not confusion, it's divinity in motion. If this message stirred something in you, I invite you to pause, place your hand over your heart, and whisper a quiet thank you to the version of you who never gave up, even when she didn't feel seen. Now breathe. Your next chapter begins here, with truth, with presence, with you. Like this message? Let it ripple out by giving it a thumbs up. Share your thoughts in the comments. I read every word with care. Subscribe to Esoteric Wisdom and turn on notifications so you don't miss what's next on your sacred path. Until next time, dear Gemini, keep listening inward. Your magic is rising.